So here's a question. Are we actually smarter together than we are alone? Is a big group of people generally wiser than just one person thinking things through? It's an old debate, really. Goes way back.
Oh, absolutely. You had thinkers like Aristotle who kind of pictured this inherent group intelligence, like wisdom bubbling up from the many.
But then, flip side, you've got someone like Hobbes, right?
Yeah,
Seeing groups more as, well, potentially chaotic, needing that strong hand. And
exactly.
it's this basic tension for the group mind versus the individual brain that we're really digging into today.
Right. So this deep dive, we're getting into the science behind collective intelligence. We've been looking at some honestly fascinating recent research. It explores how groups in the right setups can actually land on better decisions, better solutions than, any single person could alone. We want to give you a real feel for how that happens.
Yeah, and we've got some great sources. One paper in particular really frames it through network science. So our mission here is to unpack how those connections between people, the networks, were all part of how they shape a group's overall smarts.
And what's really interesting, I think, is that it's not just one single answer. The sources point to two main ways this plays out. First, how teams actually solve problems together collaboratively.
Uh-huh.
And second, this famous idea of the wisdom of the crowd, where you average out lots of independent guesses and somehow get really close to the right answer.
Right, like the ox experiment.
Exactly that. And what's kind of wild is that these two areas, they seem to work off different rules, sometimes even like contradictory principles. It's quite revealing.
It really is.
Okay.
Okay, so let's start with collective problem solving then. This is, like you said, where a team needs to communicate, interact, to build something new, find an innovative solution.
Precisely. And for these kinds of networks, a key idea is informational efficiency. Think about maybe how fast a piece of gossip spreads. If it travels super quick, that's high efficiency. Short path length, technically.
Right, fewer steps for the info to get around.
Exactly, measured by the average simple path length. But here's the twist. Faster isn't always better, especially for complex stuff.
Okay, I see. So that speed, that efficiency, it affects how the group actually functions.
Yeah, it really influences this trade-off between exploration and exploitation. Exploration is, individuals striking out on their own, trying brand new things.
Finding novel ideas.
Right. And exploitation is more about looking around, seeing what's working for others, and copying that success.
So a network where everyone's talking to everyone else all the time, super efficient, that would probably push towards exploitation, wouldn't it? If a good idea pops up, boom, everyone knows and jumps on it.
That's it, exactly. And look, for certain problems, maybe simpler ones, that's great. Imagine the solution landscape. They talk about like a map of how good different solutions are. A simple problem is like a smooth hill with one clear peak.
Obvious best answer.
Yeah. And in that case, efficient networks, short paths, they help everyone find that peak fast, converge quickly.
Makes total sense. Get the good info out, everyone wins.
Yeah.
But, and this is the really neat part, what if the problem is tricky, more complex?
Yeah.
The sources talk about rugged landscapes.
Take lots of little hills, false peaks, maybe.
Yeah.
The real best solution might be hidden, not obvious at first.
Right.
And for those kinds of problems, it turns out that inefficient networks where information flow is slower, maybe you have clusters of people working more separately, they can actually be, well, better.
Better, yeah.
Because those longer paths, the more clustered structure, it sort of shields the weird new ideas, protects them from getting shot down immediately just because they aren't popular yet.
So it gives them space to breathe, to develop.
Exactly. It lets them prove their worth. The paper has a couple of figures that show this really well, the smooth versus rugged landscapes, and then the efficient versus inefficient network diagrams.
I remember those. Okay, so did they test this out?
They did. Initially, they used things like Amazon Mechanical Turk online platforms, and the results were, well, a bit messy.
Why was that?
They figured maybe it wasn't quite like a real team, maybe people weren't as invested, or sometimes they could see which solutions were trending globally, which kind of skewed things.
Right, like quite a natural setting.
But then they ran a study with actual data scientists, put them in a competition, and there the results were much more stark.
Okay, what happened?
Well, they set up teams with really efficient communication, everyone connected to everyone, and teams with deliberately inefficient communication, like a line where you mostly just talk to your neighbors.
The lattice structure.
Yeah, a one-dimensional lattice.
Yeah.
And on the complex data challenges, the teams with the inefficient networks did way better, significantly better.
Wow.
Get this, the optimal solution. Half of the inefficient teams found it. None of the efficient teams did.
None. That's pretty convincing. So the takeaway for complex problem solving is maybe counterintuitively, you don't want too much instant communication everywhere.
Seems that way. You need those pockets, that slower spread, to keep diverse ideas alive, to let people explore different paths without instantly converging on the first decent-looking option.
So organizations should maybe think about this, like how teams are structured, meeting frequency, how easily info jumps between departments.
Exactly. Designing for, say, moderate, maybe intermittent information sharing could actually boost creativity for those really tough, complex tasks, preserve that vital informational diversity.
Fascinating stuff on problem solving. Okay, let's switch over then to the wisdom of the crowd. This is the Galton ox weighing thing, right? The average guess being weirdly accurate.
That's the classic example, yeah. The idea that averaging many independent estimates often beats even the experts.
And here, we need to distinguish the task type, don't we? Like, estimating a weight is different from, say, voting yes or no.
Absolutely. The ox is an estimation task guessing a continuous number. Voting, or maybe a doctor diagnosing an illness, that's a discrete choice. You pick one option from a set.
And for these estimation tasks, the network property that matters seems to be different. Not efficiency, but network centralization.
Right. It's about how evenly connected the network is. Is there one super connected hub, like a spider in a web?
Yeah.
Or is it more like a fishing net, where connections are spread out more evenly? That's centralization.
Okay. And I guess the worry was that if people talk to each other while estimating, they might just influence each other into making the same mistakes. Groupthink.
That was definitely a concern, that social influence could correlate the errors and undermine the whole wisdom thing.
But the experiments show something else, especially in those decentralized networks, the fishing net ones.
Yeah, this is really interesting. So in those more evenly connected networks, people's estimates did become more similar. Informational diversity went down.
Okay. So that sounds bad.
You'd think. But surprisingly, it actually improved individual accuracy, and the accuracy of the group average, the wisdom of the crowd effect, got stronger.
How does that work?
They talk about this revision coefficient. Basically, people who start out with a more accurate guess, they tend to revise it less when they hear from others. They're more confident, stick to their guns a bit more.
Right.
And these more accurate, less easily swayed people become sort of centers of gravity. They subtly pull the group average towards the right answer, even as overall diversity decreases. It seems to work best once a group gets reasonably large, maybe over 30 people or so. Figure 3a in the source illustrates that spectrum of centralization.
So in evenly connected groups, the quiet confidence of the accurate people helps everyone. But what about the spiderweb networks, the centralized ones?
Those are trickier. It really depends on that central person or node.
Ah,
If their initial estimate is pretty good, they can pull the whole group towards the correct answer very effectively.
makes sense. Leverage their influence.
But if that central, highly influential person is way off, they can drag the entire group average down with them. It makes the collective guess worse. Figure 3b shows these different scenarios. Influence cuts both ways there.
So centralization is risky for estimation tasks. Depends heavily on who's at the center. The sources also mention ways to combine estimates, right? Something about crowds beat averages.
Yeah, and the diversity prediction theorem. Essentially, the more diverse the initial guesses are, even if they're wrong in different ways, the more those errors tend to cancel out when you average them. So group diversity is really key to reducing overall group error.
Okay. And quickly, what about the discrete choices, the voting type problems? Condorcet's jury theorem.
Right, CJT and the miracle of aggregation. These are mathematical ideas showing why majority voting often works well if, and it's a big if, individual voters are even slightly better than random at picking the right option, and crucially, if they vote independently.
Independence is key there.
Hugely key. If voters are all influenced by the same bias or aren't independent, then the miracle might not happen. The paper notes that things like quorum rules needing a supermajority might be better in some situations with potential bias.
It feels like maybe we could even connect these two. Like, could we turn a yes-no vote into more of an estimation? Ask people how confident they are.
That's a really interesting thought that comes up. Maybe framing discrete choices more like continuous estimations, asking for probabilities or confidence levels, could let us use some of that beneficial social learning we see in networks before making a final choice.
Okay, let's try and synthesize this. We've got problem solving, where less efficient, decentralized networks seem good for complex tasks, and wisdom of the crowds for estimation, where decentralized networks also seem to help accuracy, despite reducing diversity. Is there like a common principle here?
It seems like there is, surprisingly. In both cases, network structures that somehow protect less popular or initially less accurate seeming ideas tend to win out in the long run. For problem solving, it's about protecting diverse approaches. For estimation, it allows the truly accurate estimates, which might not be popular at first, to eventually pull the group average in the right direction. Decentralization seems key in both, but for slightly different reasons.
That's a really neat connection. It makes you think about, say, social media. Often those platforms become very centralized, very efficient at spreading things.
Exactly. Which is great for making things go viral quickly. But it might also mean popular but wrong ideas spread just as fast, maybe even faster, potentially drowning out more accurate or nuanced information. It kind of undermines collective intelligence in some ways.
So we almost need to think about designing those online spaces differently to maybe build in some of that protective inefficiency.
It certainly raises that question: how could we structure online interactions to better combat misinformation and support finding genuinely good solutions or accurate beliefs, drawing on these principles?
And this isn't just about guessing weights or solving data problems, is it? The paper hinted these ideas apply more broadly.
They do, yeah. Briefly, it touches on social coordination, like how groups settle on the best way to do something and cooperation. Again, decentralized, maybe somewhat inefficient networks can help protect emerging beneficial behaviors or shield cooperators from being exploited too easily by defectors. The same underlying principles seem to apply.
Okay, so for you listening, the big takeaway from this deep dive seems to be that how we're connected matters a lot. The structure of our networks really shapes our collective ability to think and solve problems. And maybe, just maybe, a bit less efficiency, a bit less centralization can actually make us smarter together, particularly when things get complex.
Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe something for you to chew on. Knowing this, how might it change how you engage with your own teams or online groups? When you're looking for information or trying to solve something tricky, what kind of network structures might you now deliberately seek out or even try to build, depending on the situation?
Definitely food for thought. We hope this dive into network science and collective intelligence gives you a new lens to think about how groups work and maybe inspires you to explore these ideas further in your own world.